She saw him hand money to a woman at a garden gate at 7 in the morning. He saw her see it. Neither of them spoke. By dinner, she had rearranged the seating cards to put 12 people between them. By Sunday night, she had a story ready about a sister in York. She had been passed over enough times to know exactly what she'd seen. She was wrong. But she didn't know that yet. The Pemberton house party began, as all such gatherings did, with a great deal of luggage and very little honesty. It was the second week of October 1811, and Thornfield Grange, the Pembertons' sprawling, draughty seat in Derbyshire, had been thrown open for a fortnight's entertainment. The invitation list ran to 30 names. The wine cellar, Mrs. Pemberton had assured everyone, was fully stocked. The weather, which no one had thought to consult, was not cooperating. June Marsh arrived on a Tuesday, in a post-chaise she had shared as far as Matlock, with a clergyman's wife who had slept the entire journey and snored impressively, with one trunk, 2 hat boxes, and the particular composure of a woman who had learned to want very little from any room she entered. She was 26, the second of 3 daughters born to a country solicitor of modest income and considerable warmth. She had watched her elder sister marry well at 19, her younger sister become engaged at 20, and had arrived at 26 with good sense, a dry wit, and the quiet conviction that hope for women in her position was simply a more elegant word for disappointment. She did not consider herself unfortunate. She had her books, she had her letters, the ones she wrote and the ones she sent, which were not always the same. She had, above all, her composure, which she wore as some women wore jewels, deliberately and to good effect. The Pembertons were her mother's connection, not hers. She had come because her mother had asked, because the Pembertons had specifically requested a sensible young woman to assist with the arrangements, and because 3 weeks in Derbyshire was marginally preferable to 3 weeks listening to her mother suggest eligible curates. She had not come expecting anything. The Duke of Wrenmore arrived on Wednesday. June was crossing the entrance hall with a stack of Mrs. Pemberton's amended seating charts when the front doors opened and he walked in, and she learned, in the span of approximately 4 seconds, that she had made a mistake in coming. Not because he was handsome, though he was in the severe way of men who have never needed to try. Dark coat, dark eyes, the sort of posture that came not from vanity, but from a lifetime of rooms that rearranged themselves around him. He was perhaps 32, and he carried the dukedom the way some men carried an old injury, present in every movement, never mentioned. No, the mistake was simpler than that. She looked at him across the hall and he looked back, not with interest exactly, but with the focused attention of a man who noticed things. And June felt, in the pit of her chest, the precise sensation she had spent 6 years learning to extinguish. She looked down at the seating charts. She found a footman, handed him the charts and went to find her room. The Pembertons had arranged their house party with the cheerful chaos of people who loved company more than they loved planning. There were card games in the evenings, rides in the mornings when the rain permitted, a great deal of tea consumed in the green sitting room, and a library on the east wing that appeared to belong to no one, and therefore in practice belonged to everyone. June found the library on her second morning. It was a long, low room with tall windows and shelves that had not been properly organized since approximately 1790. She went because she had letters to write, one to her mother, one to her sister in York, and because the green sitting room had become a battlefield of matchmaking from which she preferred to be absent. She settled into the window seat, the deep one in the far corner, half hidden by the curtain, opened her travelling case and took out her writing things. She wrote her mother's letter quickly, brief, affectionate, uninformative. Then she took out a fresh sheet, wrote "Dear" at the top and stopped. She sat for a moment with the pen hovering. Then she folded the sheet once, tucked it into the back of her case alongside the 17 others she had carried there from home, and went back to reading. She did not hear anyone come in. "The Cowper," said a voice, "or the Wollstonecraft." She looked up. The Duke of Wrenmore was standing 6 feet away holding 2 books, regarding her with an expression that was not quite a smile. "I beg your pardon?" "You've been looking at the shelf for 3 minutes," he said, "and you haven't moved. I assumed you were choosing between the two." She had not been looking at the shelf. She had been thinking, but she saw no reason to explain the difference. "The Cowper," she said. He crossed to the shelf, replaced the Wollstonecraft, and held out the Cowper. She took it. "Thank you, Your Grace. You know who I am. Mrs. Pemberton keeps a list. She gave it to me on arrival." "So of course she did. He moved to the shelves on the far side of the room, and June returned to her book, and that, she told herself, was that. He stayed for an hour. He did not speak to her again. He selected a volume, took the armchair nearest the fire, and read with the particular stillness of a man accustomed to being in rooms without needing to fill them. June, from her window seat, was aware of him with the steady, low-level alertness of someone sitting too close to a fire. When he left, he said, "Good afternoon, Miss Marsh," without looking up from closing his book. She had not told him her name. Mrs. Pemberton, who had the observational gifts of a woman who had hosted 30 house parties and survived all of them, appeared at June's elbow at dinner that evening. "I see you've met Wrenmore," she said in the tone of someone offering information while fishing for more. "Briefly," June said, "in the library. He never comes to these things. His mother practically had to threaten him." Mrs. Pemberton lowered her voice. "The dukedom, you know. It all came at once. The title, the debt, the expectations. He's been rather efficient ever since." June looked across the table to where the Duke sat between two women she didn't know, answering questions with the minimum number of words required. "He seems perfectly amiable," she said, which was not quite a lie. "He is," said Mrs. Pemberton, "when he decides to be." June helped herself to the soup and decided firmly not to think about it. The rain came properly on the fourth day and locked everyone indoors. By 11 in the morning, the card tables were full. The green sitting room had been claimed by the older guests, and the younger members of the party were distributed through the house in various states of restlessness. June took her writing case and her book to the library. He was already there. She paused in the doorway. He looked up. "Miss Marsh," he said, and returned to his reading. She took the window seat. He took the armchair. The fire was lower than it had been 2 days ago, and the rain came against the glass in irregular bursts, and the room was quiet. After 20 minutes, he said without looking up, "You're not actually reading." She was in fact reading. "I beg your pardon?" "You've been on the same page since you sat down. The book is open at chapter 4. You arrived at chapter 4 yesterday." June looked at him. "You noticed which chapter I was on yesterday." "I notice things." A pause. "It isn't a compliment." She almost smiled. "I was thinking," she said, not failing to read, "there is a distinction." "What were you thinking about?" "Whether to write a letter I've been putting off." "And have you decided?" "Not yet." He looked at her then, properly for the first time, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "Who is it to?" "That," said June, "is not your business, Your Grace." "No," he agreed, "it isn't," and went back to his book. But the quality of the silence changed after that. It lost its indifference, and June was aware of it for the rest of the afternoon. The letter she had not written was not to her mother or her sister, or anyone who could be named on an envelope. It had no recipient, in the sense that it had never been sent. It was a habit she had developed at 20, in the aftermath of the first time she had believed a man meant what he said and discovered, conclusively, that he had not. She wrote the letters when something happened that she needed to understand. Not to confess, not to confide, simply to make sense of the shape of a thing before she put it away. She had written 17 of them over 6 years. She had sent none. That evening after dinner, when the rest of the party moved to cards and conversation, June went back to the library. She opened her travelling case. She took out a fresh sheet. "I think I have made an error in coming here." She read it back, folded it once, tucked it into the case alongside the others. She was asleep by 10. The house party had its own weather system, independent of the actual weather outside, and by the end of the first week, it had settled into its natural patterns. Mrs. Pemberton's niece, a vivid girl of 20 named Clara, had attached herself to the youngest Harlow brother. The oldest Harlow brother had begun a determined campaign for the attention of a Miss Dewhurst, who received it with polite unconcern. 2 of the older gentlemen argued about agricultural policy every morning and were the best of friends by evening. Lady Pemberton's companion played the pianoforte too loudly and too often, but everyone was too polite to say so. And June Marsh and the Duke of Wrenmore met in the library, every morning that the rain kept the riding party indoors, and said very little, and read, and occasionally talked. She could not have said precisely when it started to matter. It was not any single conversation. It was more the accumulation of them, the way they had arrived without discussion at a sort of armed truce that had gradually lost its weapons. He was not what she had expected. The efficiency Mrs. Pemberton had described was real. He did not waste words, did not perform warmth he did not feel, did not pretend interest. But there was nothing cold in him. He was simply careful. He assessed before he engaged. He listened before he spoke. And when he spoke to her, he paid attention. That, June found, was the specific danger. She had grown so accustomed to being in rooms where she was decorative furniture that a man who actually listened to what she said was disorienting. She noticed herself thinking more carefully before she spoke. She noticed herself saying things she hadn't planned to say. On the 9th day, the rain stopped, and the riding party went out, and June stayed behind because she did not ride well and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. She was in the library. The Duke appeared in the doorway at 10:30. "I thought you would have gone with them," she said. "I don't ride for entertainment," he said. "I ride when I have somewhere to go." She considered this. "That seems a rather utilitarian relationship with horses." "I have a rather utilitarian relationship with most things." He took the armchair. "You didn't go." "I don't ride well. I see no value in performing activities badly for the benefit of an audience." He looked at her. "That is exactly it." "I beg your pardon?" "That, the refusal to perform. Most women in your position would have gone, would have managed the horse badly and laughed about it and made themselves charming in the discomfort." A pause. "You didn't." June set down her book. "My position," she said evenly, "being what precisely?" He did not look away. A woman at a house party with no particular matrimonial ambition, a clear preference for the library over the drawing room, and no apparent interest in being better liked than she already is. In that position, most women work harder at appearances. "I am liked," June said. "Perfectly adequately. I simply don't require it urgently." Something moved in his face. Not a smile, he was too guarded for that, but the suggestion of one. "No," he said, "you don't." A beat. "I find that," he said more quietly, "uncommon." June picked up her book. Her pulse was entirely even. This was a lie. "You find it suspicious," she said. "You've been waiting to work out what I want." The non-smile again. "Haven't you been waiting to work out what I want?" "Yes," she said, "absolutely." He laughed. A real one, brief and unguarded. And June felt it land somewhere she had not given it permission to go. It was Clara Pemberton who made things complicated. Clara was not malicious. She was 20, generous, and possessed of the particular blindness of a girl who had never been invisible and could not imagine why anyone would choose to be. She found June in the garden on the 10th morning, linked arms with her and said with great warmth, "I think Wrenmore likes you." June kept walking. "I think you have been spending too much time with Mr. Harlow, who I suspect is optimistic about everything." "He is," said Clara happily. "But I'm not wrong about this. He watched you at dinner last night, not the way men watch women they find pretty, the way they watch women they're thinking about." She squeezed June's arm. "There's a difference." "Clara, I only mention it because I think you like him too, and I think you are being extremely stupid about it." June stopped walking. "I'm not being stupid." "You are being sensible, which is almost the same thing in these circumstances." Clara was entirely cheerful about this. "He's a duke, June. I know what that means. His family will have opinions, the world will have opinions, and none of it will be kind. But he looks at you as if you might say something that surprises him." A pause. "Men like that don't look at women like that very often." "Men like what?" "Men who have decided everyone is predictable." Clara unlinked her arm. "I just think you of all people deserve to let something be possible." June thought about the folded letter in her travelling case, the one that said, "I think I have made an error in coming here." "Thank you, Clara," she said. "Shall we go in?" That afternoon, for the first time, Julian Holt told her something true. It happened without ceremony. They were in the library, of course they were, and she had made some remark about the Pemberton family's book collection, which was extensive and entirely unread, and he had said dryly that most things displayed in great houses were never used. "Like the people," June said without thinking. He set down his book. "Yes." She looked at him. "I came to this party," he said, "because my mother told me I had to. Because 2 years of declining every invitation had begun to look like grief, and I am not grieving. I am simply—" He stopped. "Unconvinced," June offered. He looked at her steadily. "Yes, unconvinced." A pause. "By most of it." "By what specifically?" "By the premise." His voice was even, measured. That the correct response to a dukedom I did not ask for, and a family I cannot afford, is to enter drawing rooms and be charming until someone suitable decides I'm worth the trouble. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Every unmarried woman in this house was told who I am before I arrived. Every conversation begins already concluded. June was quiet for a moment. That must be extremely tiresome. It is. Though I should point out, she said, that some of us were handed a guest list and not a set of instructions. He looked at her sharply. I knew your name and your title, she said. I did not know what to think of you. I formed that opinion independently. A beat. It took approximately 4 days. And what is it? That you are intelligent, private, somewhat suspicious, and considerably less cold than you want people to believe. Silence. That is the most accurate assessment anyone has offered me in 2 years, he said. That is because most people are telling you what they think you want to hear. She picked up her book. I find that a waste of everyone's time. He was quiet for a long moment. Miss Marsh, he said. Yes? The letter you haven't written. Have you decided yet? She did not look up from the page. Not yet. But she had in fact just decided something. She did not name it. She tucked it away the way she tucked the letters, and told herself she would look at it later. The second week began with a shift in the weather, and a shift in everything else. The sun came out. The riding party reformed. The evenings grew louder, the card games more spirited, and the green sitting room became genuinely pleasant rather than merely tolerated. And Julian Holt began to seek her out. Not conspicuously. He was too careful for that. But she would find him near her at breakfast, near her in the evenings when the party dispersed into smaller conversations, near her in the garden when she walked after dinner to escape the pianoforte. He asked her questions, real ones, not the performance of curiosity, but the actual thing. He asked about her family, about her sisters, about what she read and why. He listened to her answers and asked follow-up questions, which was, June was finding, its own particular form of intimacy. She told him about her father, his warmth, the way he had read to all 3 daughters every evening regardless of how tired he was, the quiet devastation of losing him 3 years ago. Julian listened without filling the silence with condolences, which was more comforting than condolences. She told him she wrote letters she didn't send. He didn't ask why. He said, I have a room at Wrenmore full of unfinished accounts I will never resolve. Perhaps it is the same impulse. Yours sounds more practical. Yours sounds more honest. She looked at him. He was watching the garden, not her, but the line of his jaw was soft in the late afternoon light, and June felt the specific ache of a woman looking at something she is trying very hard not to want. She looked back at the garden. Julian, she said without meaning to. He went very still. I beg your pardon, she said immediately. Your Grace. No. He turned to look at her. Don't. A pause. June, he said quietly. She heard her name in his voice and did not move. They stood in the garden in the low October light, with the sound of the party behind them and the cold coming in from the east, and neither of them said anything else. But something had been named. It hung between them, fragile and entirely real, and June felt it with the particular terror of a woman who had been right about something she desperately wanted to be wrong about. She had not made an error in coming here. That was the error. That night she opened her travelling case. She took out a folded sheet from near the top of the stack. I think I may be in love with him. I cannot decide if this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me or the best. Possibly both. She folded it, added it to the stack, 19 now, closed the case. She lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind come off the hills, and told herself that nothing had happened. That her first name, spoken once by accident, was not a declaration. That the way he had said June, quiet and deliberate and careful, as if he had been holding it for a while, meant nothing. She almost believed it. It was the 12th day, a Saturday, and it was the kind of morning that made Derbyshire forgivable. Cold, clear, the hills bright, and the light coming hard and clean off the frost. June had risen early. She had not slept well. She had the strange, wired energy of a woman who has arrived at a decision without quite admitting it to herself, and she took it outside before the house had properly woken, walking the gravel path that ran along the east side of the Grange toward the small kitchen garden at the back. She was going to let herself hope. She had decided it in the grey before dawn, lying in a bed that was too soft and a room that was not hers, listening to the house settle around her. She was going to stop folding things away, She was going to stop treating the space between herself and wanting as a virtue. She was 26 years old, and she was not made of stone. And Julian Holt looked at her as if she had said something he hadn't expected every time she opened her mouth, and she was going to not say anything, not yet, but stop actively refusing the possibility. She knew what it meant in practical terms. She was a solicitor's daughter with no portion and no connections. He was a duke, and not a solvent one, and the world he inhabited had expectations of him that she did not fit in any conventional sense. Clara had said it plainly. The world would have opinions and none of them kind. June was not naive about that. She had been in enough drawing rooms to know exactly what would be whispered, and by whom and with what relish. But he had said June as if it was something he had been carrying, and she was going to let herself believe it was true. It was a small decision. It felt enormous. She rounded the corner of the kitchen garden wall and she saw him. He was standing near the garden gate, partially hidden by the old yew that grew at the corner. He was not alone. The woman was perhaps 35, handsome, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a travelling bonnet. She was not a guest. June had catalogued every guest, and her dress, though perfectly respectable, belonged to someone of a different station entirely. A woman of the middling sort, June thought, a tradesman's widow or a professional man's wife. Not someone who would have any ordinary reason to be at the garden gate of Thornfield Grange at 7 in the morning. Julian's back was to June. He was speaking, low, quick, in the way of a man who did not want to be overheard. His hand went to his coat. He drew out something, a folded note or a small packet, and held it out. The woman took it. She looked at what was in her hand, then up at him. She said something June could not hear. Julian shook his head once, and the woman tucked what she'd received inside her cloak, with the practiced discretion of someone accustomed to receiving things quietly. Then Julian reached out and briefly touched the woman's gloved hand, a gesture so small and so private that June felt the intrusion of having witnessed it. The woman turned and went through the gate. Julian turned back. He saw June. For a single second, neither of them moved. She had the presence of mind, or perhaps just the training of a lifetime, to give a composed nod, the nod of a woman who has witnessed nothing remarkable, and turned back toward the house. She walked at an even pace. Her face, she was fairly certain, was quite calm. Inside, she went to the small writing room off the back corridor, empty at this hour, sat down at the table and put her hands flat on the surface. She did not allow herself to feel it immediately. She assembled it first, the way she assembled everything, methodically, without haste. He was a duke. He had money, or the appearance of it. He was private, guarded, and deeply suspicious of people's motives. He was 32 and unmarried. A woman not of his world, not of the party, received something from him in the early morning at a gate he had clearly arranged. The discretion of it was too practiced to be accidental, and he had touched her hand. The picture was clear. June had not invented it. She had not misread a shadow or misheard a word. She had seen the transaction with her own eyes, at close enough range to read it plainly. She thought about what Clara had said. You of all people deserve to let something be possible. She thought about the way he had said her name in the garden. June. Quiet, deliberate, as if he had been holding it. She thought about the woman at the gate. The difference between a man who said a name as if it meant something and a man who had private arrangements he conducted at dawn was not necessarily a contradiction. She knew that. She had been 20 and foolish once, and the man who had smiled at her across a village assembly had also, it turned out, been engaged for 3 months. People were capable of sincerity in one hand and concealment in the other. She had learned this. She had, in fact, built her entire approach to hope around having learned it. She was not going to cry. She was not going to be dramatic. She was simply going to be sensible, which was what she was, and she was going to go home. This was not panic. She was careful to recognize that. It was a reasonable conclusion drawn from observable evidence by a woman who had, until 40 minutes ago, been preparing to set aside reason in favor of feeling. The evidence had arrived before she could make that error in full. She was, if she was honest, mildly grateful for the timing. She went upstairs. She opened her trunk. She began to pack. She was composed by breakfast. She was, in fact, so composed that she frightened herself a little. She came down, took her plate, spoke warmly to Clara and to Mrs. Pemberton, and to the older gentleman who argued about agriculture. She was pleasant. She was present. She gave no indication of anything. Julian was at the other end of the table. She was aware of him looking at her twice. She was aware of not looking back. After breakfast, she did not go to the library. She went to the green sitting room, which she had been avoiding for 10 days, and she sat with the older ladies and she did the thing she had come here to do, assisted Mrs. Pemberton with the remaining arrangements, checked the week's programme, was useful and pleasant and entirely deliberately ordinary. At 2:30 she returned to her room and continued packing with quiet purpose. She had already composed her excuse. She would speak to Mrs. Pemberton that evening. Her sister in York, she would say, had sent word of a difficulty. Not an illness. An illness could be verified or disproved too easily. And Mrs. Pemberton was the kind of woman who offered to send for a physician. A difficulty. Vague, but credible. She would take the post road north on Monday morning, in the direction of York, and redirect from Bakewell when she was well clear of the Grange. She was not proud of the deception. She was also not prepared to tell the truth, which was that she was leaving because she had nearly been foolish and had caught herself in time and did not trust herself to remain for another 3 days without the catching becoming considerably harder. She was setting a stack of books on the trunk when she heard footsteps in the corridor, purposeful ones, and then Julian Holt appeared in the open doorway of the library passage. She had come out to return the copper, which she had been holding for a week. The timing was unfortunate. He stopped when he saw her. "Miss Marsh." He glanced at the book in her hands. "Returning it?" "Yes." She moved toward the library. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace." "A moment." His voice was even but deliberate. "I'd like to speak with you." "I was just going into—" "I know." He stepped aside to let her replace the book. She went in, set the cowper on its shelf, running one finger along the spine, which she had not meant to do, and came back to the corridor. He had not moved. The corridor was empty in both directions. A servant might come at any moment. This was, by the standards of 1811, as private a conversation as two unmarried people could have without disaster, and it was still not entirely comfortable. "I would rather not do this here," she said. "The alternative is the library with the door open and a clear view from the passage." He paused. "I'm not asking for privacy. I'm asking for 2 minutes." She looked at him. "You saw this morning," he said. "I saw nothing of consequence." Her voice was steady. "I was walking early, so were you. There is nothing to discuss." "You are packing." She kept her expression polite. "My sister in York has been well by your account since the moment you arrived." His voice was quiet, not accusing, precise. "You mentioned her in the library on your 3rd day. Quite well, you said. Situations change." He looked at her for a long moment. "June." "Please don't," she said. "Don't what? Explain." "You owe me no explanation. We are acquaintances, Your Grace. We have spent some agreeable mornings in a library, that is all." He was silent. She could feel the effort it cost him, the restraint of a man who had something to say and was watching every exit close. She recognized it, distantly, because she was doing exactly the same thing. "I would like to explain," he said, "what you saw." "I saw you in the garden, that is all I saw." She met his eyes. "I am not asking questions, Julian. I am not accusing you of anything. I am simply going home." "I see." That's the way he said it. Not angry, not defensive, simply quiet and resolved, as if he had heard something he had perhaps been waiting to hear. That sound broke through her composure more effectively than any argument could have managed. She did not let it show. "Good afternoon, Your Grace," she said, and went back to her room. That evening she wrote a letter. Not an unsent one, a real one to her mother, saying only that she would be home earlier than expected. Then she opened the travelling case and took out the stack, all of them, 19 letters now, and spread them on the writing table. She did not reread them. She simply sat with them the way one sits with evidence. "I think I am making a mistake. I am going to make it anyway." She folded it. That made 20. She tucked the stack back in and closed the case. She lay awake for a long time. It was not grief, exactly. It was the specific exhaustion of a woman who has carried hope carefully across a great distance and set it down before it broke her. She had been so careful. She had been so deliberately, industriously careful. Not to want, not to hope, not to read meaning into silences and gardens and the way a man said her name. And then she had decided in the grey before dawn to stop being careful. And within 3 hours she had been given, with perfect efficiency, exactly the reason she had been careful in the first place. She did not cry. Nothing had happened. Nothing had been promised or given or taken. She had been foolish privately. She would be sensible publicly. She would go home. She would be fine. She almost believed it. Outside, the wind came off the hills and found all the old places in the Grange's walls, and June Marsh lay in the dark and listened and eventually slept. She avoided him on Sunday with the thoroughness of a woman conducting a military operation. The morning she spent with Mrs. Pemberton, going over the final day's arrangements. "You are well, my dear?" Mrs. Pemberton asked twice. "Perfectly," June said, both times. Mrs. Pemberton received the news of June's early departure with warm regret and no visible suspicion, which June considered her finest performance of the trip. The afternoon she spent in her room, completing her packing and beginning a letter she did not send. At dinner she was seated far from him. She had with gentle precision rearranged the cards, and she talked with easy warmth to the people on either side of her and did not once look to the other end of the table. After dinner, while the rest of the party moved to the drawing-room, she went to the library one last time. She had left a volume she had borrowed from the window seat. She was retrieving borrowed property. That was all. She found it. She stood for a moment in the room, the fire lower than it had been 2 weeks ago, the window seat empty, the armchair where he had sat every morning facing the cold grate, and she was fine. She was perfectly fine. She turned to go. Julian was in the doorway. Not blocking it. There was room to pass, but he was present enough that she stopped. "Miss Marsh," he said. "I was retrieving a book," she said. "I know." She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither moved. "Monday morning," she said. "I'll be gone before 7. "I know that too." He did not move from the doorway. "I want you to know," he said, choosing each word, "that what you saw was not what you concluded. I am not asking you to believe me. I am simply telling you, because it seemed important that you knew." June felt the pull of it, the same pull she had felt in the corridor, the part of her that wanted to ask, to listen, to let him explain it into something different. This is exactly what it would feel like. If the explanation were a lie, it would feel precisely like this. She had been here before, not here, not in a library in Derbyshire, but here in this particular posture, wanting to believe a man who had given her one clear reason not to. "You are very kind," she said. "Good night, Your Grace." She walked past him. He did not stop her. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard him say quietly, to no one, "June." She did not turn around. She walked to her room, opened her travelling case and looked at the stack of 20 letters. She did not take out a new sheet. She already knew what she would have written. She closed the case. She was up before the house on Monday morning. The post-chaise was ordered for 6. She was gone before 7 in the cold grey dark, taking the north road in the direction of York, with 1 trunk and 2 hat-boxes, and the particular composure of a woman who has learned again that she was right to want very little. The hills disappeared behind her in the mist. She did not look back. The Marsh family home in Bakewell was a modest thing. 2 stories, good bones, a garden that had been lovely once and was now merely tidy. June's mother had kept it running with the particular determination of a woman who had outlived her husband's income by 3 years on careful management and sheer will. June arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, having redirected the post-chaise quietly at Bakewell rather than continuing north, to find her mother in the parlour with her mending and no evidence of any crisis whatsoever. "You look well," June said, setting down her bag. "I am well," said her mother. "I was surprised to get your letter. You said you were staying a fortnight." "My plans changed." Her mother looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who had raised 3 daughters and could read all of them like print. She said nothing. She poured tea. June sat. She accepted the cup. She looked at the parlour, the familiar furniture, the portrait of her father above the mantel, the window that looked onto the tidy garden, and felt the strange double sensation of being entirely safe and entirely flat. "Was the party dreadful?" her mother asked. "Not at all. The Pembertons were very kind." "And the company?" "Perfectly agreeable." Her mother set down her own cup. "June." "Mama." "Something happened." "Nothing happened." She said it with full conviction because technically it was true. "I simply decided it was time to come home." Her mother did not press. That was one of the graces of her. She had learned with June specifically that pressing produced only more composure and less truth. She let the silence sit. June drank her tea and looked at the garden and thought about a library in Derbyshire. and the way a fire sounded when the room was otherwise quiet. "Your sister writes from York," her mother said after a while, reaching for a letter from the side table. "The baby is well. Edward has taken on a new client, some estate work in the north. She says she may come for Christmas." "That would be lovely," June said. And she was fine. She was perfectly quietly fine. This was something she knew how to do. She slipped back into the rhythms of Bakewell with the ease of long practice. She called on the neighbours. She assisted her mother with the household accounts, her father's old work, which no one else in the family had the patience for. She walked every morning, the same route along the river, and came back with cold hands and clear eyes, and the steady, manageable sensation of a woman who has put something away and locked the lid. She did not write any letters she did not send. She told herself this was progress. She was in the middle of the accounts on the 7th day home, a Tuesday grey and still, the kind of November morning that made the indoors feel deliberate rather than confining, when her mother appeared in the doorway of the small study. "There is a gentleman at the door," her mother said. June did not look up from the ledger. "Which gentleman?" A pause. "He says his name is Julian Holt." Her mother's voice was perfectly level. "He says he is the Duke of Wrenmore." June looked up. Her mother's expression was not surprise exactly. It was the expression of a woman revising an earlier theory and finding the new one considerably more interesting. "He's asking for you," her mother said. June set down the pen. She looked at the ledger. She looked at her hands. She thought with absolute clarity, "I am not ready for this. I'm going to do it anyway." "Show him to the parlour," she said. "I'll be a moment." She was 5 minutes. She used them to go upstairs, look at herself in the glass. She was in a plain grey morning dress, her hair pinned simply, no particular elegance and no particular armour, and decide that there was no version of this that would not be difficult, and the only thing she had any control over was whether she was honest. She went downstairs. He was standing at the parlour window when she came in, looking out at the garden. He turned when he heard her. He looked tired, not diminished, but as if the last week had cost him something. He had come by carriage at pace. There was a quality to him of someone who had travelled directly rather than carefully, and his coat carried the particular creasing of a journey, taken without much thought for appearance. "Your Grace," she said. "I asked you not to call me that," he said. "You suggested I not stop using your name. I don't recall the specific prohibition." His mouth pressed together, not quite a smile. "June." She clasped her hands. "You've come a long way." "Yes." "My sister is in York," she said. "She is perfectly well. I should tell you that, as I imagine you had already suspected it." "I suspected it before you left," he said. "York is north, Bakewell is south. A woman caring for a sick sister does not take the north road and then redirect." He paused. "I didn't know for certain, but I doubted it." June held his gaze. "Then you know I lied." "I know you found a reason to leave that had nothing to do with your sister." His voice was even. "I have come because I cannot allow you to keep the conclusion you drew, not without at least having said my piece." June looked at him steadily. "What conclusion do you believe I drew?" "That the woman in the garden was my mistress." He said it plainly without softening it. "The money, the early hour, the fact that I looked guilty when I saw you, because I was startled and because I knew exactly how it appeared." She said nothing. "Her name is Mrs. Eleanor Coates," he said. "Her husband was my closest friend from school, Charles Coates. He died 2 years ago, a sequence of bad investments, a great deal of debt, and a morning in his study that I will not describe in further detail." He let that sit. "He left Eleanor with 3 children and creditors at the door. I have been making arrangements, quietly and at intervals ever since. She has too much pride to accept charity, and too little money to refuse help when it is offered discreetly. I meet her when I can do so without spectacle, because spectacle would humiliate her, and she has already suffered considerable humiliation." June was very still. "I told no one," he continued, "because Eleanor did not want to be known as the woman kept solvent by a duke's discretion, and because—" He stopped. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Because, in my experience, when people discover you are doing something decent, they immediately find a reason to question your motives for it," June heard herself say quietly. "That is a rather lonely way to live." "It is accurate." He looked at her directly. "I did not come here to present myself as a wronged man seeking vindication. I came because you are a person who draws conclusions carefully and acts on them honestly, and the conclusion you drew was wrong, and I—" He paused. "I found I could not let it stand." June looked at him. The parlour was very quiet. Outside, the November garden sat grey and still. The fire was low. Her father's portrait looked down from above the mantel with the steady benevolence it had always had. She thought about the stack of letters in the travelling case upstairs, 20 of them now still packed, because she had not found the energy to fully unpack anything. "I think I am making a mistake. I am going to make it anyway." It turned out she had been right on both counts. "I owe you an apology," she said. "No." "I do." She kept her voice steady. "I saw something I did not understand, and I assembled a story from it that confirmed things I already believed, and I left without asking a single question, without extending the courtesy of doubt to a man who had in 2 weeks given me no reason to think badly of him." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "That was not fair. I am sorry." He was quiet for a moment. "You believed it because it was a reasonable interpretation." "I believed it because I was frightened," she said, which is not a defense. The shift in his expression was small, but she saw it clearly. Something he had been braced for had not arrived, and in its place he was, carefully, disarmed. "Frightened of what?" he said. Here it was. She had written the letters for 6 years, because she needed to say things somewhere. She had never sent them because saying them aloud to the person they concerned was not release, but exposure. Not understanding, but surrender. She was 26 years old. She was standing in her mother's parlour in a plain grey dress with no armour, and nothing to lose that she had not in a cold October garden, already nearly lost by her own hand. "I was about to let myself hope," she said, that morning. "I woke up and I had decided, for the first time in a long time, that I was going to stop being careful. And then I came around the corner of the kitchen garden wall, and I saw—" She stopped. "It was very efficient, that is all." Julian did not move. "Efficient." "I thought, of course, I knew better, and I packed." She met his eyes without flinching. "Because it is easier to leave before you're asked to." "Who asked you to leave?" he said, "before?" "That is a longer story than you've come here for." "I came from Derbyshire," he said. "I have the time." June almost smiled. "A man. I was 20. He was kind and I was foolish, and he had a prior attachment he had not seen fit to mention." She kept her voice even. "It was instructive." "I imagine it was." He held her gaze. "And so you decided." "I decided that the safest interpretation of insufficient evidence was always the worse one." She paused. "It had served me well for 6 years, until it didn't." He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her with the expression she had been cataloguing for 2 weeks. Not quite a smile, not quite calculation, but something that had lived between the two from the beginning and had never resolved into either. "I find myself," he said quietly, "in an unusual position." "What position is that?" "One in which I need to say something I have not said to anyone in a very long time. And I am aware that I am saying it in your mother's parlour on a grey Tuesday morning, which is—" The corner of his mouth moved. "Not what I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "I didn't," he said. "That is rather the point. I stopped imagining things a long time ago, and then I found myself in a library in Derbyshire, and the woman in the window seat told me that hope was simply a more elegant word for disappointment, and I thought, there it is, someone who sees it exactly. And then—" he paused. "I found that I did not want her to keep seeing it that way." "Julian," she said. "Yes." "I was wrong about the woman in the garden." She looked at him steadily. "I was not wrong about everything else." "No," he said, "you were not." "Then say it," she said, plainly. He looked at her for a long moment, the assessment, the caution, and then the deliberate, conscious setting aside of both. "I love you," he said, plainly. The words arrived without flourish, direct and quiet and irreversible, the way he did everything. "I have," he continued, "since approximately the 4th day when you told me that performing badly for the benefit of an audience was not something you saw value in, and I thought, I have never wanted to marry anyone before, and I find I want to marry her." A pause. "I did not plan to tell you in these circumstances. I did not plan any of this." "I wrote a letter." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "When I got home. I always write them when something happens that I need to understand." She held his gaze. I didn't write one this time. I sat down to do it and found I had nothing to say to myself that I didn't already know. What did you know? That I was in love with you, she said, and that I had been trying not to be since approximately the third day, and that trying had not in the end been especially effective. Something happened in his face, something warm and open and entirely undefended, and June, who had spent 6 years learning not to look at things like that, looked directly at it and let herself. He closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was not a cautious kiss. It was the kiss of two people who have each been too careful for too long and have, in this moment, finished with it. June's hands found the lapels of his coat. His found her face. It lasted a considerable interval, and when it ended they were standing considerably closer together than was strictly proper, and June was mildly breathless, which she considered entirely reasonable given the circumstances. "Well," said June. "Yes," said Julian. She laughed, a real one, low and warm, and he looked at her with an expression she had no category for yet, and thought she would spend quite some time learning. "Julian," she said. "Yes." "My mother is almost certainly in the hallway." He did not look away from her. "Is she the sort of woman who will be pleased or alarmed?" "Both, in that order, very quickly." "Then we should give her something definitive to be pleased about." He took her hands. "Marry me, please." A beat. "I am aware the please is unusual. I find I mean it." June looked at his hands over hers. She thought about the travelling case upstairs, all 20 letters, 6 years of things she had needed to understand, all of them still folded and carried and never sent. She thought that perhaps, going forward, there would be fewer of them, not none, but fewer. But there was, however, one thing she needed to say first. "I have no portion," she said, "no connections of use to you. My father was a country solicitor. You are a duke with a family who will have expectations, and a world that will have opinions, and none of it will be comfortable." She looked at him clearly. "I want you to have said this to yourself already." "I have said it to myself every day since the 9th day of the party," he said without hesitation, "and every day I arrived at the same answer." His hands tightened over hers, just slightly. "My family's expectations have cost me enough. I will not let them cost me this." June looked at him. "Yes," she said, plainly. He smiled, full and real and unguarded, the kind she had seen only once before in the library, and it was, she thought, the best thing she had looked at in quite some time. Her mother was, in fact, in the hallway. She appeared in the parlour doorway, with the expression of a woman who has been standing outside a door for an indeterminate period, and has absolutely no regrets about it. "Your Grace," she said to Julian with admirable composure. "Mrs. Marsh," he said equally, "I wonder if I might speak with you regarding your daughter." "I believe," said her mother, looking between the two of them with transparent delight, "that you may." June sat on the sofa and let them manage it, which they did with great efficiency. Her mother, who had raised 3 daughters and buried a husband and kept a house on dwindling means for 3 years without once losing her dignity, was not a woman easily overwhelmed. She received the Duke of Wrenmore's request with composure and warmth, and what June strongly suspected was a very carefully contained emotion. When Julian rejoined June in the parlour, her mother had excused herself to the kitchen on a matter that apparently required immediate attention and a great deal of additional pastry. "She approved," he said. "Of course she did. She has been trying to marry me off since I was 22. You are, I think, something of a relief." He sat beside her, closer than strictly necessary, and she found she did not object. "A relief?" "Duke," she said. "She will dine on this for years." He looked at her with the private expression she was beginning to think of as hers. "And you? Are you relieved?" June looked at him. At the tiredness in his face, the 7 days, the carriage from Derbyshire, the grey Tuesday morning in a modest Bakewell parlour, at the way he had crossed the room to her, at the way he had said, "I love you," as if it were simply a fact he was done concealing. "No," she said, "I am arrived. I think that's the word." He took her hand, held it. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly it." They were engaged by the end of November, and the world, specifically the portion of it that concerned itself with dukes, had a great deal to say about it. Julian's mother, the Dowager Duchess, wrote from Bath within a fortnight. The letter was long, careful, and entirely without warmth. It covered in succession the expectations of the Wrenmore line, the particular importance of connections in repairing the family's social position, the unsuitability of a match that brought neither capital nor consequence, and a closing paragraph that managed to express devastation without deploying any word that could be specifically objected to. June read it at Julian's insistence because he felt she ought to know what they were walking into. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table. "She writes well," June said. Julian looked at her. "The sentence construction," she said. "The paragraph about connections is particularly elegant. She makes the case without quite making it, which is much harder than it looks." "June, I am not being flippant." She looked at him clearly. "I knew this was coming. I told you I knew. I simply—" She picked the letter up again, read the closing paragraph once more, and set it down with the same care. "I would like to write back." He stilled. "You want to respond?" "I would like to introduce myself," she said, "in my own words, before she decides who I am based entirely on what she imagines." He was quiet for a moment. "She will not receive it charitably." "No. But she will receive it, and she will read it, and she will know that her son is marrying a woman who does not frighten easily." June met his eyes. "That seems worth establishing early." He looked at her for a long moment, then, "What will you say?" "I shall tell her I am aware of the irregularity of the match. I shall tell her I have no intention of pretending otherwise. I shall tell her that I intend to learn everything there is to know about Wrenmore, about the estate, about what is owed and what is possible, and that I intend to be useful." She paused. "And I shall tell her that her son is a man worth knowing, and that I think she knows that, and that I hope we may come to understand each other in time." Julian said nothing for a moment. "She will think you impertinent." "She will think me honest," June said, "which may eventually be more useful." He looked at her with the expression she was still cataloguing, warmer than it had been in October, easier in its warmth, as if he had been practicing. "You are," he said, "the most practically courageous person I have met." "You have been spending time with people who confuse caution with sense," she said. "It skews the comparison." He laughed. She wrote the letter that evening. The response from the Dowager came 3 weeks later. It was considerably shorter than the first letter. It acknowledged June's communication and indicated that the Dowager would receive Miss Marsh at Bath in January, before the wedding, to form her own assessment. It was not warm. It was not unwelcoming. It was, June thought, the response of a woman who had written off the situation and found herself, despite herself, slightly curious. She would take it. Clara Pemberton wrote with considerably more warmth, several exclamation points, a great deal of capitalization, and the information that she had told June so at length on the 10th morning of the party, and expected full credit. June wrote back confirming the credit in full without reservation. Mrs. Pemberton Sr. wrote to June's mother and reportedly cried at the news, which June's mother reported with quiet satisfaction. The older ladies of Bakewell received the engagement with the particular mixture of astonishment and proprietary delight of people who have known a girl all her life, and are now required to revise their expectations of her upward with some urgency. None of it was comfortable, all of it was manageable. What June had not anticipated, though she thought afterwards that she should have, was the way Julian moved through it. He was not defensive. He did not apologize for the match, did not soften it, did not perform contrition for having chosen outside the expected parameters. When a distant cousin wrote a letter of arch condolence, one understands these things happen, and no doubt Miss Marsh is perfectly amiable in her way. Julian wrote back a response so precisely civil and so entirely final that the cousin did not write again. When his younger brother Thomas met June for the first time, at a dinner in late November, and said with the blundering warmth of a large young man who meant well and chose words carelessly, "I say, Julian, she's not at all what I expected," Julian said with perfect evenness. "She is exactly what I expected, that is rather the point." June beside him said nothing, but she tucked the sentence away with the same care she had once reserved for folded letters. They were married in December, in the church in Bakewell, in a ceremony that was modest and warm and attended by everyone who mattered. Clara came with her mother and cried happily throughout. June's sister arrived from York with the baby and stood in the front pew beside their mother and squeezed her hand at the right moments. Julian's brothers were both present. Thomas, loud and good-natured, in the front row, the younger one, Henry, quieter and more observant, who caught June's eye during the vows with an expression that said plainly, "I was worried about him, and now I'm not." The dowager sent a gift and her regrets. She was unwell, she said. June wrote a warm reply. They would try again in spring. June wore her mother's pearls. Small, simple, not what anyone expected a duchess to wear at her own wedding. She had considered something more elaborate, briefly, and then she had put the pearls on and looked at herself in the glass and decided she was not going to begin her marriage performing a version of herself that was not true. She carried nothing but her gloves, which she put on at the door and kept on through the ceremony, because it was cold and she was practical. Julian, when he took her hand at the altar, glanced down at the gloves and then up at her with a gleam of genuine amusement. She returned it with complete composure. The vicar appeared not to notice. Afterwards, at the breakfast her mother had arranged with characteristic precision in the front rooms of the house, June stood with a glass she was not drinking and watched the room, her mother talking to Julian's brothers, Clara managing the baby with surprising competence, Julian himself across the room with her mother, speaking with the easy attention she recognized, and felt the strange layered quality of a moment that was both entirely ordinary and entirely improbable. Julian looked across the room and found her eyes. She raised her glass slightly. He inclined his head slightly. 3 weeks ago she had been packing a trunk in Derbyshire, building a story from a single scene and conducting a careful retreat from everything she had almost let herself want. It was remarkable, she thought, what happened when you stopped. They went to Wrenmore in January. The estate was in Northumberland, a great serious house on a hill above a river, with tall windows that admitted the grey northern light and rooms that had been beautiful once and would be again, given time and careful management. Julian had been honest about the finances before they married. The debts were real, the work would be long, and the choices would sometimes be constrained. June, who had grown up watching her mother run a household on careful mathematics, received this information without alarm and began making lists. "So you don't have to," he started on the second morning, finding her in the estate office with the ledgers spread across the table. "I know," she said. "I want to." He looked at the accounts, then at her, and said nothing. He pulled up the chair across from her and opened the second ledger. They worked in silence for 2 hours, the fire in the grate and the grey January light coming off the hill, and June thought, this is a good sign in a marriage, the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. The estate office had a window seat. She found it on the third morning, deep and cushioned, set into the east wall looking over the kitchen garden and the long slope of the hill to the river below. She sat in it with her coffee and her real letters, the ones she sent, which were many, and the pale winter light came through the glass and lay across the floorboards in long, cold rectangles. She heard him before she saw him, his footstep in the doorway, then the particular pause she had come to know. "There you are," he said. "Here I am." He crossed the room and sat beside her, in the way he always did now, close proximity being something he had decided to stop rationing. He looked out at the kitchen garden for a moment, the frost on the ground, the bare black rose stems, the hill beyond running down to the river. "Working," he said. "Writing." She held up the letter, Clara wanting every particular of the wedding breakfast. "Miss Pemberton has requested a full account." "What are you going to tell her?" "That she was right and I was insufferably stupid, and I'm now insufferably happy, and she is to hold both pieces of information equally." He looked at her with the expression she was still happily mapping. "Are you?" "Insufferably happy." "Yes." June looked out the window, at the frost, the roses, the hill, the river, at the whole of the January morning, grey and clear, entirely her own. She thought about the travelling case upstairs. She had unpacked it properly 2 days after arriving at Wrenmore. Everything out, everything found a place, except for the small wooden box she had put the letters in. All 20 of them. 6 years of folded sheets addressed to no one, sitting in a box on the writing table in the bedroom she now shared with her husband. She had not written a new one since October. She thought she might not need to for quite some time. "Yes," she said, "I believe I am." Julian took the letter from her hands, set it on the windowsill and kissed her, which she received with complete willingness, and the January light came through the glass and lay across them both, and outside the hill ran down to the river, and the frost sat quiet on the ground, and the morning was still and new. The final scene. Their elder daughter was born in October of 1812, and they named her Frances after June's father. She came into the world with dark eyes and a disposition that suggested from very early that she would be seeking the window seat in every room she entered. Julian held her for the first time with the expression of a man who has learned to be suspicious of unexpected gifts and is, on this occasion, choosing to set that suspicion entirely aside. "She looks like you," he said. "She has your eyes," said June from the bed. "I'm told that changes." "And if it doesn't?" He looked down at Francis, who was regarding him with the focused ancient attention of the newly born. "Then she will have your eyes and my suspicion, and we will have a great deal of trouble on our hands." "We will manage," said June. "Yes," he said, "and we will." The Dowager came to Wrenmore that spring. Her health improved, her curiosity apparently winning the longer argument with her reservations. She and June spent 3 days conducting a careful, precise, mutually respectful assessment of each other, and at the end of it the Dowager said over breakfast on the final morning, "You will do, Miss Marsh." "Mrs. Holt," June said pleasantly. The Dowager looked at her. Then, very slightly, she smiled. "Mrs. Holt." It was not warmth exactly, but it was a beginning, and June had always been good at beginnings that didn't look like much. The second daughter came 18 months after Francis. They named her Clara, which made the actual Clara, now Mrs. Harlow, the optimistic brother having proved entirely worth his optimism, cry with a happiness that was completely characteristic. Baby Clara had her mother's colouring and what appeared to be her father's reserve, which June found privately amusing. Julian held her with considerably more ease than he had held Francis, which June noted and felt without comment. The 4 of them were in the estate office on a Sunday afternoon, in April of 1814. Francis, now 18 months old, conducting a solemn investigation of the lower bookshelves. Clara asleep in the cradle by the fire. Julian at the desk with the accounts. June at the window seat with her correspondence. When Francis pulled a small book from the shelf, sat down on the floor with it, and began turning the pages with great deliberate concentration. June watched her. "She's reading," she said. "She's looking," said Julian without glancing up. At 26 years I would have called that reading. He looked up then, and found her eyes across the room, and she saw the thing she had been seeing for over 2 years now. The warmth he had stopped concealing, the ease she had watched him slowly and deliberately learn. It lived in his face with the comfortable settledness of something that belonged there. "What are you working on?" he said. "Correspondence." She paused. Beside the writing case on the window seat cushion was a small wooden box. She had brought it down that morning without entirely meaning to. She looked at it for a moment. "Actually," she said, "I'm not sure." She opened the box. 20 letters, all folded, all addressed to no one. She fanned them out across the window seat and looked at them. 6 years of things she had needed to understand, a record of every hope she had put away and every door she had closed carefully behind her. She picked up the second to last one, unfolded it and read it. "I think I may be in love with him. I cannot decide if this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me or the best, possibly both." She carried it across the room and held it out to him. He read it, looked up. "Both," he said. "Both," she agreed. He held it out. She took it back, crossed to the fireplace and let it go. It caught at once. A clean, brief burn, bright for a moment and then gone. She stood and watched until it was ash. Then she went back to the window seat, and Julian came with her, and they sat in the good April light with their daughters nearby, and the hill running down to the river below, and the roses, after the long winter, beginning at last to show green at the stem. June looked at the remaining 19 letters in the box. Then she closed the lid. She would deal with them another day. Today there was no need. Today the morning was warm and long, and the window seat was wide enough for 2, and Julian's shoulder was warm against hers, and Francis had abandoned the book in favor of a more interesting investigation of the fireplace fender, and Clara slept on undisturbed, and outside the April light moved across the hill in slow gold sweeps, and there was, June thought, absolutely nothing that required understanding. Everything was already known.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment if you enjoyed the story.